Hi. So if you watched the first video, now you know a little bit about what I hope to accomplish with this series of videos on bonsai. And we're going to start by talking a little bit about some of the basics. So what is bonsai? What are we talking about there? Well, the term bonsai really just refers to a plant in a pot. That's the literal definition. Now, obviously, bonsai is more than just a plant in a pot. But by the same token, lots of things can be bonsai. Bonsai can be small, they can be enormous. All different kinds of species of plants can be bonsai. They can look in all different kinds of ways. I think the goal of any bonsai is to make the plant seem older than it is, bigger than it is, to have more character than you would think a small plant would have. You can do that with a very young plant, or you can do that with an old plant. You can do it with a big plant or a small plant. But in general, the better bonsai tend to have things like smaller leaves and thicker trunks, interesting movement to the branches, in a sense that the plant is older and more mature than maybe it is. And if you don't know what an older, mature tree looks like, go outside and just go for a walk out in the woods somewhere if that's available to you. Take a long walk, or if you don't have access to the outdoors, get online and Google pictures of old trees and just sort of get a sense for what are the common features that old trees tend to have. And what you'll see is that there's an enormous amount of variety, but there are some things that old trees have in common. They tend to have nooks and crannies, and they may have broken branches or odd angles. They tend to have foliage that is differentiated into different pads or areas of dense growth that distinguish from other spaces where there isn't so much growth. And I know I'm talking a little abstractly here, and I'll try to show what I mean, but my point is that there are qualities of bonsai that you should be aware of as qualities, indications of a good bonsai versus a bad bonsai. This is just like any other art form. Bonsai is an art. It's a combination of an art and a science. There is good art, there is bad art, and you have to know what makes the difference. What are people looking for in good bonsai? Again, I'll reference some of these ideas as we go along. For today, what I want to focus on is just how you might start with a really basic plant. Like, what do you do with it? And the example that I'm going to focus on today is this one. So this is a juniper. Specifically, this is a Shimpaku juniper. Shimpakus are very commonly used as material for bonsai. As you can tell, this is not a finished bonsai. This is a very young tree. I don't know, it's just a few years old, and it doesn't really have much of a shape. It doesn't really look like an old tree. These long branches here that don't have much shape to them. It doesn't have much character. The branches don't have much thickness to them. And so you would say, we could all agree that this is not an example of a good bonsai, and it's not supposed to be. This is what we call a pre-bonsai. It's something that hasn't even been worked on yet. And I picked this up from a bonsai nursery, but you can find Shimpaku junipers at garden centers all over the place. They're pretty common to find. And if you can't find a Shimpaku, you can definitely find other kinds of junipers that are easy to work with. Junipers are great because they have some good qualities for bonsai. For example, the needles, as you can see, are fairly small. They're not huge needles. They're fairly compact, and so as the tree ages, that's going to serve you well. It's going to make the tree look bigger than it is, and they tend to be hardy. They're hard to kill. and they grow well in a variety of conditions. They do need sunlight, and so if you don't have any direct sunlight or bright sunlight where you live, these may struggle. You're going to need at least a few hours of bright sunlight during the growing season. But the good news is, because it's an evergreen, it doesn't need a lot of light in the wintertime, and you can get away with very little, if not zero, light through the winter months. And we'll talk about that when we talk about overwintering. Anyway, what I wanted to do with this today is I wanted to show you how we could make this a better bonsai. So it's small, it's scrawny. How do you make this look like a big, thick tree? Well, there is no real shortcut. You know, it's going to take years. There's just no way around it. But there are things that you can do to try to speed up the process. And one of the things that you can do is you can bury it in the ground. And that's what I'm going to try to do with this one right here. I'm going to bury it in the ground, and I'm going to leave it in this pot. And the reason why I'm going to do that is to make it easier for me to dig it out of the ground after it's grown up a little bit more and it's a little thicker, and looks like a more full, mature plant. As you'll notice, it has holes in the bottom, and the roots of the tree will grow out through the holes, and they will grow into the soil, and that will allow the tree to get bigger, but it will also make it easier for us to dig out the plant without potentially killing it down the road. Now, I may also cut some more slits in the pot just to give it some extra expansion room. I don't want it to get pot bound while it's in the ground and then sort of choke itself off. Pot bound means that the roots become so dense that it actually interferes with the root's ability to function. This tree is not root bound. I'm going to take it out here, and what you can see is that it has pretty dense roots. It has roots all the way to the bottom, but it's not pot bound. You'd notice the difference. There's still, you can see lots of soil here. It's a healthy tree. You can see the white tips of roots that are growing. That shows me that the roots are healthy. This potting medium looks like it's a pretty good one. It's you can tell that it's sandy. That you can see the white sand in it. It's got lots of pieces of bark and such, and that helps to increase drainage and keep your bonsai from suffocating. So what we're going to do next is I'm just going to bury this in the ground, and then we're just going to leave it pretty much for probably a few years and see where that gets us. Okay, so I found a good spot to plant my little baby Shimpaku here. It's a spot that gets a decent amount of sunlight during the day. This is not a sunny day today, so you just have to trust me on that. And so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to dig the hole, and we're going to dig a hole that's just deep enough for the plant to go up to the base, the top of the pot in. So just we're going to skip through this a little bit. Okay, so we've dug our hole. Now what we're going to do is I'm going to cut a few just little slices in the pot here. Again, just to give the roots another way to get out if they're looking for a way out, but still kind of keeping most of the central roots within the pot, so that again it makes it easier and safer for us to dig this out of the ground eventually without hopefully killing the tree in the process, because if you damage the roots too much, you may kill the tree. So I'm just going to stick it in the ground here. And fill in the ground around it with dirt. Now you got to be thinking about what kind of dirt are you planting in. If the dirt is really dense, like with clay, then it may be harder for that tree to grow in that condition because clay is hard for roots to grow into. Hopefully the dirt that you're working with is a little more porous. You know, you can crumble it in your hands. It's not too difficult to dig with. But if you do have a lot of clay in your yard and it's really hard to dig in, you may want to dig a bigger hole than you actually need and supplement with some garden soil, a better quality soil, just so that the roots have an easier time growing into it. This dirt is pretty good, and so I'm going to leave it as is. And so again, this is now done. I'm going to just sort of wait on it and give it a couple of years to grow, and we'll see what we get. So let me show you real quick what the advantages of burying a plant in the ground for a while are. This is a bougainvillea, which is a more tropical, subtropical plant that I've had for, I don't know, around 10 years or so. And when I first bought it, it was again just a baby bougainvillea that I picked up at just a standard garden nursery. It wasn't expensive, it wasn't big. And what I did with it was I put it into a sizable pot and I just buried it in my backyard. And so over the years, the trunk got very thick. Bougainvillea are very vigorous growers. And so it doesn't take actually all that long for them to develop a real thick trunk, especially down in the tropics where I used to live. And then after it had gotten this nice big thick trunk, I dug it out of the ground and I started to prune down the roots and eventually got it into a smaller pot. And that saved me a lot of time. If I had taken that baby bougainvillea and put it right away into a bonsai pot, it would, the trunk might not be nearly as thick now as it is now, because in order for the trunk to thicken, it has to develop a large root system, it has to develop large branches, and trees need a lot of space to be able to do that. When you put them into pots, that's going to slow down their growth and development. So if you have a plant that you're thinking about turning into a bonsai, consider this as a way to try to speed things up. If you have a yard that you can bury something in the ground in, it's a great technique. So I have one more thought to add about the benefits of using this technique and planting a baby plant in the ground. And that is that it solves the problem of what you do with your plant over the winter. If you were to take that bonsai and put it into a pot and leave it outside over winter, and if you live in a cold climate like I do, I live in Pennsylvania, over the winter it would probably die because the cold temperatures would damage the roots. When a plant is in a pot, the air around it is much colder than if the pot were in the ground and warmed by the little bit of warmth that is retained in the soil. Planting your plant into the ground guarantees that it's in a pretty safe place. Now, nothing is ever guaranteed when it comes to plants. It may not survive the winter. But it stands a much better chance than if it were just sitting in a pot. Now, there are other things that you can do with your plants over the winter if you're not going to plant them in the ground, and we can talk about that in a later video. For now, let's leave our little Shimpaku where it is and wish it good luck for the winter.